When your own child bans you from the happiest day of her life, something inside you dies quietly. Not with screams, but with silence that lasts forever. I had imagined her wedding since she was little. The way her smile would light up a room, the way I'd hold her hands one last time before she began her new chapter. But when the invitation never came, and instead a cold message said, "Please don't come, Mom," I realized motherhood isn't a promise, it's a risk you take with your heart. Remember the day she told me she was getting married. Her eyes sparkled the way they did when she was 5 and talked about fairy tales. I had hugged her so tight that she laughed and said, "Mom, I can't breathe." That laughter still echoes in my mind. I didn't know then that years later, the same daughter would silence my voice from her world. It's strange how love can turn into distance, how care can be mistaken for control, and how silence can hurt more than words ever could. For weeks, I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Maybe I was too protective. Maybe I didn't approve of her choices loudly enough. Or maybe I just loved her in a way she couldn't understand. People said she'd come around, but they didn't know what it feels like to be erased from your child's story. Every morning, I'd wake up thinking, maybe today should call. But the days stretched into shadows that had no end. Then one afternoon, I saw her wedding pictures online. She looked breathtaking, like a dream I once held in my arms. But what tore me apart wasn't her beauty. It was the emptiness behind her smile. There I was, scrolling through her happiness, as if watching someone else's life unfold. My heart wanted to bless her, but my soul whispered, "You weren't meant to see this." That night, I cried without sound, because grief like that deserves silence. The next morning, I sat by her old piano, the one she used to play when storms frightened her. My fingers touched the keys, and I remembered her tiny voice saying, "Mom, when I get married, will you sing for me?" And that's when I knew what I needed to do. I couldn't be there in person, but I could still send her something, not a gift wrapped in paper, but something wrapped in memory, forgiveness, and love. I spent days writing a letter, not a plea, not guilt, just truth. Every word carried years of laughter, pain, and everything between. I told her about the night she was born, how I had whispered her name before she even opened her eyes. I told her that no matter what walls she built, she'd always live inside my heart. And at the end, I wrote one line that took me hours to finish. "You don't owe me your presence, just your peace." With that letter, I placed a small velvet box. Inside was her grandmother's wedding ring. The same ring I had promised to give her when the time was right. It wasn't a symbol of tradition anymore. It was a bridge between what we were and what I hoped we could be again. I sealed the envelope, knowing it might never be opened. But sometimes love isn't about being received, it's about being sent anyway. The day of her wedding came. The world outside was celebrating love. And I was sitting in the quiet of my small kitchen, staring at the cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. I imagined her walking down the aisle, her dress shimmering under soft lights, her smile trembling between joy and fear. And in that moment, I realized something. Maybe love isn't meant to be shared at every ceremony. Maybe some blessings are meant to be whispered from a distance. Later that evening, I got a call. It was her voice, trembling and soft, the way it used to be when she was little. "Mom?" she said, pausing as if searching for words. "Thank you for the ring." My breath caught. For the first time in years, silence didn't hurt. it healed. I could hear her crying quietly on the other side, and I let her. Sometimes tears are the only way hearts speak. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of pain, but because of peace. I kept her photo beside me, the one where she was 8, missing her front teeth, laughing with cake on her face. I whispered, "You found your way back?" And though she didn't say much, her call had said everything I ever needed to hear. Love doesn't need grand gestures, it just needs one moment of truth. Days turned into weeks. And though she hadn't called again, something inside me felt lighter. I no longer waited for messages or explanations. I simply prayed that her heart would stay gentle. The house didn't feel as empty as before, maybe because forgiveness had moved in quietly where pain used to live. I started noticing little things again, the smell of morning tea, the sound of birds, the warmth of sunlight creeping through the curtains. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It's the slow return of life after the storm. Asterisk. Then one morning, a letter arrived. My hands trembled when I saw her handwriting on the envelope. Inside, there was a short note, written with the same messy curve she had when she was a child. "Mom, I kept the ring close all day. It felt like you were there with me. I'm sorry for everything. Can we start again?" I pressed that letter to my chest and smiled through tears. The wound wasn't gone, but it had stopped bleeding. Asterisk. The next weekend, she came home. No cameras, no decorations, just her standing at the doorway with hesitant eyes. I didn't say a word. I simply opened my arms. She stepped forward, and in that moment, years of silence dissolved between us. She sobbed against my shoulder, whispering, "I thought you wouldn't forgive me." I held her tighter. "You're my daughter. There's nothing to forgive." Sometimes the hardest thing to learn as a mother is to let love outlast pride. Asterisk. We sat for hours talking about her wedding, her fears, her mistakes, and mine. There were no accusations, only understanding. She told me she was scared I'd judge her choices, that she wanted to make her own story without the weight of my expectations. I listened quietly, realizing how often love hides behind misunderstandings. We both had been waiting for the other to reach out, not knowing that the distance had already done enough damage. Asterisk. That night, she stayed over. We cooked together, laughed about old memories, and even played a few clumsy tunes on her old piano. It felt strange and beautiful, like rediscovering a song I thought I had forgotten. When she went to bed, I stood by the door watching her sleep, and I remembered the tiny hand that used to hold mine. The years had changed her face, but not her heartbeat. It was still the same rhythm I'd once listened to before she could even speak. Asterisk. In the days that followed, our calls became frequent, our silences shorter. Sometimes she'd send pictures of her new home, sometimes just a good morning message. I didn't need more. When love returns, even a whisper feels like music. The walls of my house seemed to breathe again. I began to cook her favorite dishes, not because she was coming, but because the memory of her smile now tasted sweet instead of bitter. Asterisk. One evening, she invited me for dinner. I hesitated, afraid of seeing the faces that had replaced me at her wedding, but when I arrived, she met me at the door with tears in her eyes and said, "This time, you're my guest of honor." The table was set simply, but on it was something that made my heart stop. The old velvet box open. with the ring inside. She placed it in my hand. "Keep it," she said. "It was always yours to give when you wanted to. I just wasn't ready to receive it." I smiled, realizing she had finally understood. The ring wasn't just gold. It was a circle of stories, of love, loss, and return. I told her maybe one day you'll give it to your daughter, and she learned that family isn't about perfection, it's about finding your way back after being lost. She nodded, her eyes shining. For the first time in years, we both laughed freely, without the weight of the past sitting between us. Later that night, as I returned home, I looked at the sky wide, endless, forgiving. I whispered a thank you to the quiet universe that had carried my prayers when words had failed. Sometimes love needs distance to reveal its depth. I realized then that I hadn't lost my daughter. I had simply learned to love her from afar until she was ready to come home. The next morning, I placed the ring in my drawer, smiled at her photo, and made myself a cup of tea. Life had come full circle. Not because everything was perfect, but because peace had finally arrived. Love, after all, isn't measured by invitations or ceremonies. It's measured by the courage to forgive, to wait, and to believe that even broken bonds can bloom again. Moral, love doesn't disappear when doors close. It waits outside, patient and silent, until hearts remember how to open again. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it into peace. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? If this story touched your heart, give it a like. And for more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stay connected. More emotional life stories are coming soon.